On November 12th, Russian forces continued their offensive operations along the Kupiansk-Svatov-Kreminna line, making confirmed advances. Geolocation material from the same day indicates that they approached a position west of Serhiivka, which is approximately 13 kilometers west of Svatovo. This confirms Russian information about the occupation of Serhiivka. A Russian news aggregator claimed that on November 11, Russian forces moved near Lyman Pershi, Kislivka, and Makiivka, 12, 20, and 22 kilometers from Kupiansk and Kreminaya, respectively. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian General Staff reported on the same day that Russian forces carried out unsuccessful assaults in the vicinity of Sinkovka, Petropavlovka, Ivanivka, Stelmachivka, Nadia, Novoyehorivka, and the Serebryanska forest, located 7 to 16 kilometers from Kupiansk, Swatov, and Kreminaya. A Russian mill blogger also reported fighting in these areas. Lieutenant Colonel Volodymyr Fedyo, spokesman for the Ukrainian Ground Forces Command, said Russian forces were continuing their offensive towards Kupiansk, but were regrouping without achieving strategic successes over the past month. Another Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces surprised the Ukrainians in the Kupiansk area, but did not build on their initial successes. On the other hand, Ukrainian forces continued their offensive operations in the same area on November 12th, making little progress. Geolocated footage from that day shows Ukrainian forces clearing a Russian position south of Pershotroniv, approximately 24 kilometers east of Kupiansk. Russian military officials said their forces repelled Ukrainian attacks near Sinkovka, Zahoruikovka, and Bilohorivka. According to the latest reports, the Russian airline iFly, acting on behalf of the Russian Ministry of Defense, transported conscripted soldiers to Rostov-on-Don on November 12th. From this southwestern Russian town, soldiers were then to be sent to war operations in Ukraine. These flights were organized from the Siberian city of Novosibirsk. This development occurred in the context of sanctions imposed on the Russian aviation industry by Ukraine's Western partners, including the European Union, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. These sanctions include a ban on the use of Western airspace by Russian passenger aircraft and restrictions on the export of aviation technology. The introduction of these restrictions caused a serious crisis in the Russian civil aviation sector, leading to financial losses and deterioration of the fleet due to lack of spare parts and insufficient maintenance. In response to financial difficulties, some airlines with close ties to the Russian government, including iFly, have accepted orders from the Russian Ministry of Defense. Such activities were aimed at making profits thanks to state subsidies, according to the National Center of Resistance. iFly is owned by Alexander Burton, who is also the co-founder and co-owner of the Russian travel agency TezTour. Additionally, in March, the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, accused Alexander Narodko, head of Rosaviatia, Federal Air Transport Agency, of supporting the Russian military in deploying forces near the border with Ukraine and in occupied Crimea. On November 12th, Ukrainian forces continued their ground attacks in the Bakhmut area, but with no confirmed territorial gains. According to information from the Ukrainian General Staff, these attacks were concentrated south of Bakhmut. In turn, the Russian Ministry of Defense, MON, reported that elements of the Russian southern grouping of forces managed to repel 5 Ukrainian attacks in the vicinity of Klishchevka and Kurdyumovka, which are located approximately 7 and 13 kilometers southwest of Bakhmut, respectively. On the same day, Russian forces conducted limited and localized offensive operations near Bakhmut, but again without noticeable progress. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Ukrainian forces repelled more than 10 Russian attacks in the areas of Dubov, Vasilivka, Kromov, Klishchivka, and Andriivka, located 8 to 10 kilometers from Bakhmut. The spokesman of the Ukrainian Ground Forces Command, Lieutenant Colonel Volodymyr Fedyo, also reported on repelling Russian attacks in the vicinity of Ivanovo, located 6 kilometers west of Bakhmut, marking the active defense of Russian forces in this area. Colonel General Oleksandr Syrsky, commander of the Ukrainian Ground Forces, noted that Russian forces are intensifying attempts to regain previously lost positions towards Bakhmut. Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian forces managed to push the Ukrainians out of their positions in the area of Bodanivka and Klishchivka, and that they had strengthened their presence in Klishchivka. One Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces have regained control of the Berkivka Reservoir north of Bakhmut, although it is unclear whether they control the entire area around the reservoir. Additionally, on November 11th, another Russian mill blogger published footage purporting to show the actions of the Russian 106th Airborne Division towards Bakhmut. Since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2002, the Russian armed forces have suffered significant losses in personnel and equipment. The morning statement of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on November 13 shows that Russia's personnel losses in Ukraine amounted to 312,550 soldiers. In the last 24 hours, the number has increased by 800 deaths. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine also provided detailed data on equipment losses of the Russian military. So far, Russia has lost 5,354 tanks, 10,079 armored combat vehicles, 9,949 vehicles and fuel tanks, 7,569 artillery systems, 881 multiple launch missile systems, 580 air defense systems, 322 aircraft, 324 helicopters, 5,634 unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, 22 ships, and boats, as well as one submarine. These data highlight the significant scale of losses suffered by Russia during the hostilities in Ukraine. On November 12th, Russian forces continued their offensive operations in the Avdiivka area, but without making any confirmed territorial gains. According to information from the Ukrainian General Staff, Ukrainian forces managed to repel more than 18 Russian attacks in the vicinity of Avdiivka, Severna, Tonenka, and Pervomayisky, which are located 6 and 11 kilometers west and southwest of Avdiivka, respectively. Russian mill bloggers reported on November 11 and 12th about the continuation of the advance of Russian forces in the steppe area, located 3 kilometers north of Avdiivka. Some of them claimed that Russian forces had reached the outskirts of the settlement, while others spoke of taking positions within the settlement itself. A Ukrainian Telegram channel detailing the tactical situation around Avdiivka reported on November 11th that Ukrainian forces had pushed the Russians out of steppe after they temporarily took positions in the settlement. ISW has not confirmed visual evidence of these Russian activities in steppe. In turn, Russian mill bloggers claimed that Russian forces carried out heavy attacks west of the Avdiivka heap and near the Avdiivka coking plant in the northern part of the city. On November 12th, one Russian mill blogger reported marginal progress in the area of the Tsarskaya Okhoda restaurant, located immediately south of Avdiivka, but ISW observed no visual confirmation of these claims. In response, Ukrainian forces recently launched successful counterattacks near Avdiivka, achieving marginal territorial gains. Geolocated material published on November 11 indicates that on November 10, Ukrainian forces advanced south of Avdiivka near the E50 highway connecting Donetsk with Yenakievo. On November 12th, a Russian mill blogger claimed that last week Ukrainian forces had launched a counterattack and re-established control of previously lost positions towards Vodyan, 7 kilometers southwest of Avdiivka. Ukraine has intensified its attacks on Russian military forces, logistics, and other key targets in occupied Ukraine and Russia, according to the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War, IASW, on November 12th. According to a report by Ukrainian Military Intelligence, UR, on November 11, at least 3 Russian officers were killed in Melitopol as a result of an explosion organized by the local pro-Ukrainian resistance movement. A day earlier, HUR reported that Ukrainian surface drones carried out an attack that sank 2 Russian fast-landing craft off the coast of occupied Crimea. In addition, reports included other recent attacks, such as the assassination of Moscow-appointed plenipotentiary and former military commander Mikhail Filiponenko in occupied Luhansk on November 8th, and the rocket attack on Skadovsk on November 9th, which was aimed at eliminating several high-ranking Russian officers. Since at least least the summer, Ukraine has been targeting Russian targets in occupied Crimea and the Black Sea region. According to the British Ministry of Defense, these actions led to the functional failure of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. On October 23rd, the Washington Post, citing undisclosed official sources, reported that the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, and HUR were allegedly responsible for dozens of assassinations of Russian targets since February 2002. High-profile figures allegedly eliminated by Ukrainian intelligence services include Russian naval officer Stanislav Rozhitsky in Krasnodar and Russian military blogger Vladlen Tatarsky in St. Petersburg, sources told the Washington Post. On November 13th, the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces reported intensive military operations in the Donetsk region. Over the past 24 hours, Ukrainian forces have responded to most of the Russian attacks centered on Marinka and Avdiivka. In the Marinka area, Ukrainian forces managed to repel 24 Russian attacks. In Avdiivka, where Russian troops are trying to encircle the city, Ukrainian forces responded to 17 attacks. Russian forces intensified their ground attacks on Avdiivka and surrounding settlements in early October in an attempt to surround the city. This campaign was supported by heavy shelling and airstrikes that continue to cause civilian casualties. According to the Ukrainian military, on November 11, Russian forces lost approximately 10,000 soldiers, over 100 tanks, over 250 other armored vehicles, and 7 Su-25 aircraft in a month of fighting near the frontline city. In total, there were 69 combat clashes along the entire front line on the last day Russia will carry out. On January 17th, Russian Defense Minister Shoigu announced the establishment of 2 new strategic inter-service territorial administrations, LMD and MMD, and reported that recruitment, formation, and training of personnel had been ongoing in both military districts since July 3rd. In 2010, the Russian Ministry of Defense merged the LMD and MMD into the WMD, and the WMD part was further divided, creating the Joint Strategic Command of the Northern Fleet in 2014. The 2000 restructuring of the military district was part of broader reforms aimed at modernizing the Russian armed forces and creating a more consolidated command and control system, C2. However, Russian military analysts have since criticized these changes as ineffective, especially in the context of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The restoration of the MMD and LMD is intended to create streamlined C2 structures that are necessary to focus on and manage operations in the northwest and west direction in the context of the war in Ukraine. Currently, WMD is focused on the northeastern part of the Ukrainian border, Belarus, and Russia's border with NATO through the Baltic states. The strategic goal of WMD is to support Russian operations in Ukraine and to oppose NATO. Finland's recent accession to NATO and the likely accession of Sweden has exacerbated this challenge. The Russian Ministry of Defense announced on October 8th the liquidation of the Northern Fleet, which borders Finland and the Arctic, as a formation equal to a military district. This process includes the transfer of naval assets to the Russian Navy by December 1st. If the borders of these districts are restored to their pre-2000 state, the LMD will border Finland, Sweden, and the Arctic, and the MMD will border northeastern Ukraine and Poland. WMD will cease to exist in its current form. This restructuring of military districts will theoretically divide the burden of command of Russian anti-NATO forces between 2 full-fledged districts. This will strengthen Russia's power projection capabilities along the border with Finland and enable MMD to prioritize operations in Ukraine on the Russian-Ukrainian border and through Belarus. However, it is unclear when the MMD and LMD recovery will be fully completed, and ISW will further assess the district-level implications of these changes in the upcoming 2024 report.